Hey everyone, we're stoked for our next guest, Nick Tveitbakk. He's the chief engineer of Pachyderm Studios in Cannon Falls, Minnesota. Pachyderm is a legendary studio that has hosted great artists like Nirvana, Sunvolt, PJ Harvey, and The Breeders, among others. I first met Nick there working on a session with the Motion City soundtrack. He's a great engineer with a great set of ears and just a great guy. Right now, we have my buddy.
Alrighty.
From Minneapolis, Nick Tveitbakk. Yeah,
Hey.
Nicky.
Welcome.
Hello.
Hi. And Nick, I'll just really quick, a few years ago, I worked on a Motion City soundtrack record in Minneapolis, well, actually in Cannon Falls at Pachyderm, which is an amazing residential studio in the woods in Cannon Falls. It's Cannon Falls, right?
Yep.
Cannon Falls, Minnesota, and it's a super famous studio that Nirvana did in Utero with. We looked through the list, like it's Nirvana, Sunvolt, Soul Asylum,
PJ Harvey.
PJ Harvey. Did she do the one with what's his name?
Rid of Me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
That's with Steve
Albini.
Yeah, Steve Albini.
That
guy.
Forgot his name.
That guy. But anyway,
Live did Throwing Copper there.
you did.
Yeah.
See, but it's like so nestled in the woods. It's a beautiful like environment to record. So I rolled in there with Motion City soundtrack, and we made a record together. And me and Nick worked together for what, like 12, 14 days?
When was this?
It was actually like a month, I think.
Maybe it was a month. It was
Yeah.
like, it seemed like 12, 14 days.
It was quick.
Right? Yeah. But
When was it?
this was what, like 5 years ago or something, or 4 years ago?
Like 4 years ago.
Yeah. And it was fantastic. We had the best time. The band just went back to the house and me and Nick would hang out. Didn't we have that secret bottle of rye or something?
Yeah, Templeton Rye.
So how did you wind up there?
Because the band was from Minneapolis.
And they knew about this.
Yeah, and it was, it's like when you have a band from Minneapolis and they want to get away to record, and you're from out of town, you have to go to Pachyderm. You know
And
what
it's
I mean?
a residential studio.
Oh, it's got a huge house off the side of the
Tell
studio.
me about it. Or Nick, you tell us about it.
Yeah, I mean, we have a really, really big house. It's kind of a Frank Lloyd Wright-esque house. Sleeps like 12 people,
Wow.
5,500 square foot.
Is the studio in the house itself, or is it
No,
a
the
separate?
studio is separate. It's kind of down the hill. The house has got a pool and a sauna. It's just a really awesome,
Wow.
cool mid-century house to hang out in.
Wow.
And, it works really good for people coming in from out of town or even local bands, swing down for the weekend. And you're just, like any other residential studio, immersed in the whole project.
That's the point of it.
Yeah.
What's the nearest big town?
Minneapolis.
Which is how far?
40 minutes.
Yeah, it's
Oh,
not
that's
that
good.
far.
No.
I mean,
The
But that's
airport's
far
even
enough.
closer. The airport's like 25 minutes.
Right.
So if you fly in, you're there in the same amount of time it takes to drive anywhere in LA or New York or
Right.
whatever.
But it's far enough that it maintains its feel as a residential studio. People.
Yeah, because it's surrounded by woods and it
Yeah,
has like
man.
a trout stream.
yeah, well, tell them like when you're recording drums, you look out like the whole back of the studio's windows.
Yeah, it's these huge, I think they're like 15, 20-foot windows in the main part of the studio, and it's all the woods and the trout stream. is
When
down
I
there.
do drums, I usually gaze out the window as well.
Well, that's
Yeah, but
what's-
you're looking at the apartment next door to you, and doing drums is code for something else.
Yeah, the war on drums.
That's what a lot of people say too. They're like, wow, I can see outside. This
Yeah.
is so weird.
Yeah.
And, we're out in the middle of nowhere, so you can make noise
Oh, dude.
all night long.
Yeah.
And what's your history there? Like, when did you start? And
I started there about 5 years ago. Someone I worked for, John Cooker, I worked at his studio in LA, CD Underbelly, started in Minneapolis, and the place was run down, and he was actually looking for a private studio for himself and to move his family. And, it was foreclosed on and just like needed a lot of work. And he kind of rolled the dice and bought it. He brought me down there at like 10:30 at night after the open house. And he had taken the keys from the realtor and said, I'm a studio owner. I want to go down to the studio and just take a look at it. And instead he got in his car and drove into town and made copies. And so then later that night he brought me down, like, what do you think?
All right.
We weren't even supposed to be in there. Should I buy it? And I was like, no way. This place is so messed up. Like, it's smelled. There's like dead animals, mice, mold, water damage. Both roofs had been leaking. It was just really trashed and run down. And I was like, don't do it.
But it was run down since when? Because obviously in the 90s, it was totally happening.
In the 90s, it was totally happening. And then like early 2000s, it was still happening. But I think when he sold it, the original owner sold it to another guy who then just never did any improvements that needed to be done when he bought it. Right. And so it just continued to go into decline.
And there was no gear in there?
No gear. So, it was all John's like surplus stuff. He actually had a Helios console from Island Studio 2 that we brought in for the console, the first version, which was amazing. Yeah, it was. It was, I think Exodus was mixed on that console.
Wow. And now you have the API, right?
Yeah, we have Paul Wolf's API, actually.
Ah, we had Paul Wolf here last year.
Sitting right there.
I listened to that podcast. Exactly. So... yeah, he brought me down there and he's like, what do you think? You know, should we get this place? And I was like, no way. It's going to be so much money. And like the next day he called me and he's like, yeah, I put an offer in.
Great.
And he bought it for like, I don't know, like 20% of what it was worth. And then over the next 2 years, we remodeled everything, the house and the studio. Wow. Went through contractor after contractor. You know, him and I were picking up paintbrushes and swinging hammers. I didn't engineer or do anything in the studio at CD Underbelly for like 6 months towards the end, just because it was taking so long to remodel. And, you know, we're getting to that point where it's like, we need to like get people in here and start working. And during that time, John realized that like this place is so beautiful and amazing. Like, how can I just like keep it for myself and just have my...
Oh, so when he bought it, it was for him personally?
Just going to be for him personally, because it was such a steal. But then once things really got like redone and you could see it, you know, with a fresh coat of paint and fresh roof and basically fresh everything. I mean, every surface in the studio and the house had been redone and restored.
I mean, when I got there, it was stunning. Like the record room was beautiful. We were joking, but the band would leave to go back to the house, and then me and Nick would listen to music and just sip rye in the control room because it was just so... It was such a beautiful environment. You didn't really kind of want to leave there. And the house is fantastic. Like you mentioned, the Frank Lloyd Wright nature of it. Like just the downstairs pool, like when the guys would go downstairs to go swimming. And it was just like really surreal. It was not even, you know, like Dreamland doesn't have that kind of shit going on.
They had one of those pools up, you know, one of those outdoor... plastic
Schwitz? A Schwitz pool? No, but you've been to Echo Mountain, which is a similar. Yeah. Does that have? I mean, it's really unto itself. You know, that's the thing. And I forgot about the Frank Lloyd Wright nature.
A lot of these residential studios have houses. The two you just mentioned, off-site. Right? Didn't Dreamland originally?
You had to walk down. You have to walk down the little driveway.
Right, but Echo Mountain, the house is like a mile or two away.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that. Okay. Anyway, tell us more.
Yeah, you said Schwitz. We've been sauning a lot lately. So then the studio opened, what was that? Reopened like 2015. And we did a record. Actually, we opened because John had booked studio time in classic Cooker fashion, like nothing's finished. And he's always would say, like, we're going to be carrying out the sawhorses out the back door when the band's loading in their gear in the front door, like just like every other place we like build.
A typical studio owner too, like just, you know, get a date so we can get finished.
Yep. And so we had Trampled by Turtles there 2 records ago. So their second to last record was done there and booked there. And we sold the Helios console to Billy Corgan. He kept offering us money, and brought in an API 1608.
We have one.
And just temporary, because the console we had bought was in Sweden at the Hive studio, Paul Wolf's old console. And again, classic Cooker fashion, we don't even have a console. Right. And there's this band coming in, and I'm like, you know, wiring everything up and figuring everything out. But then once Trampled came in, it was just kind of, we hit the ground running. Like there was so many awesome artists that have like come back over and over again. And I think like maybe a year later, after like, you know, probably nonstop recording, I think you came that summer.
Right.
And we had the API at that time.
Right.
And then that January, of like a year after Trample came in, John passed away.
Yeah.
So we were like totally skyrocketing, like rebuilt the place. Everything was going great. And he passes away. Like Congleton had just come.
Oh, really?
With this band called The Districts. And
Right,
like,
I remember the Districts.
all these just amazing producers and artists, and everything was going great. And he passes away.
And it was super sudden, obviously, right? Because it was,
Yeah.
I remember talking to you on the phone and you telling me, well, in fact, I remember I had that booking with the band from Minneapolis, Night Moves.
Yep.
And we had booked the studio and we were not on our way, but very much close to coming up. And the studio was closed and it got crazy because I remember me being on the phone. Can I talk about this a little bit?
Yeah.
So, and correct me if I'm wrong, but John's wife at the time took control of the studio and locked it down, correct?
Well, there was some where all these amazing like creative things have been happening for a year and this great energy going on. People got involved that like didn't care or understand about that. And so they were like, well, what do you mean? Like with you and I, like, well, Nick and John can't go in the studio. What if they walk off with a bunch of stuff? And we were
right.
We were like, we're going to make a record. We're not trying to steal microphones. We're like making a record. Like, they just kind of would see the whole creative side of things as maybe like a, negative, sneaky people. And just because they didn't understand.
Yeah, because what kind of people make music? Like really creepy, like underhanded people?
I mean, which is true, but we're not thieves.
First
right?
of all, I like
exactly.
I want to see
everything else.
I want to see your bill of sale
For my glasses?
for all your microphones.
This is going to be gone when we're done.
Yeah, exactly. Like guitars are missing. But I forgot about that. And in fact, it's interesting because, I really was pushing to still record there. And I remember I had multiple conversations with the lawyer, the wife's lawyer, trying to convince him that, and I had to send my discography and I had to get the record company, Domino Records, sent a letter to him, showing proof of legitimacy. And it was the kind of thing where we were so dying to get in there. And it was a similar thing, a band from Minneapolis, a 5-piece band. And at the end of the day, we couldn't get in. Like they wouldn't let us in.
So, were you the studio manager? So, even with that kind of credential, they didn't trust that you can just carry on and do sessions?
Yeah, no one. And I'd worked for John at that point for 16 years. I started working for John in 2002 at his studio in Minneapolis called CD Underbelly, which had all kinds of amazing records done there too. Like Semisonic did Feeling Strangely Fine. Nick Launay, who later became a big client out at our LA CD Underbelly, did like Girls Against Boys and Semisonic and all these bands. Steve Lillywhite was there. So John had all these contacts at that studio. And someone bought that building and we had to move the studio, like kind of a classic thing, to LA, which then we moved CD Underbelly to LA at Jeff Piccaro's old studio in the Valley. And that
From
was
Toto.
there for like 10 years. And so I'd worked for John for 16 years and it didn't matter to them.
How did you get over the hump?
John's parents actually
Really?
stepped in, who are amazing people. His mom's like, and his mom and dad and his older brother are like family to me. So they kind of stepped in. It was crazy. I got a court order to go back to recording music because they were that like into it and they knew about it. Like maybe not like every little detail about recording bands and whatever, but they knew that it was a super important thing to John and to me. And we had been doing it for so long. And they also knew that things were going really well.
Right.
So why would we want to stop all of that?
It's ironic because Stewart got a court order to stop recording music for a while.
I know a good lawyer. If you want to take care of that.
Sorry, bro.
Good.
Anyway, so with my Night Moves record, we ended up working at what places did
Winterland.
We worked at Winterland, and then we went to what was the keyboard studio?
Oh, Foxtone.
Yeah, and then we mixed in New York. So we kind of bounced around a bunch, but that was like super last minute. I had to find.
So they just said
we couldn't get
no.
into no.
So you were shut down?
Yeah, we were
For
totally
a
shut
month.
down.
And the gear was all there. Everything stayed the way it was.
Yep.
And you just couldn't get in there. It's crazy.
Yeah, it was really insane.
Like I had to turn my keys over. That was a hard day.
Right.
Like this set of keys from like the studio out in New York, the studio in LA, and like all the stuff at Pachyderm. I had to like hand it to some guy I didn't even know, thinking basically like, oh, I'll probably never see those places again.
That lawyer guy was really tough. I remember writing a note to myself, remind me to call this guy like 6 months from now and leaving a nasty message for him, because he just treated me like I was shit. You know what I mean? And it was just like, wow, that was just chilling.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, he got what was coming to him later on.
He did?
Yeah. Which was fun. But it was a lot of like traumatic like testimony and things like that.
So
like,
you guys went to court.
Yep. And I was up there.
So
like,
this was
talking.
based on John's wife. Who hired the lawyer?
Well, that's kind of the crazy thing where like there is like an innocence to a lot of it, where John's wife is not from America. And so people were like, well, you need to get a lawyer because there's a lot of stuff. John didn't have a will. And, you know, there's like millions of dollars of things. People are going to be running away. And, you know, they were just looking at me and his family like, well, you're just like everyone else. You're just going to steal everything. And so it wasn't exactly that they were like the worst people in the world.
She was advised.
She was advised to do all that stuff. And later on, and like now, like everything is fine. But at that time, it was like, you know, how... And I kind of see where they're coming from.
Right.
You don't know that guy. Like that's $1 million studio. Like what are you gonna trust him with like an $18,000 mic? And they didn't even know it would like a U47 cost that much money or anything like that. So later on everything turned out, but it was like a lot of testimony and like telling them how we're good people and this is what John used to do, this is what we used to do, this is how things operate, like explaining the recording business to a bunch of attorneys and judges.
Right. And what were the judges like? Were they totally like question marks over their heads, or did they kind of follow along with it?
Oh, they followed along. And like later on, like I think, like what did the judge say? Something about John owned one of Joe Walsh's Les Pauls. And this judge is like quiet, like the whole weeks and weeks and weeks of stuff. He's like, and he chimes in about this Les Paul. There's a judge in this room that plays guitar that would love to play that Les Paul. And I'm like, oh, you've been like this whole time, like just keeping your mouth shut and like listening and, you know, like a judge should, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, it turned out later, like that guy he knew what was going on.
Yeah.
He knew who was doing what, and that, you know, they were kind of doing some weird, shady stuff.
And so you're resolved now, you're open for business.
Yep. Yeah, we've been resolved for a while.
And
basically because John's parents stepped in.
Right. Are you the chief engineer as well?
I'm everything.
You're everything.
Yeah.
So
You
you've
are
kind of
everything.
taken over the place.
Yep.
Well, he was everything when I was there.
Right.
Yeah,
Like
John and I ran all 3 studios, just the 2 of us. We would like, he'd be flying from LA back to Minneapolis, and I'd be going to LA to like kind of turn the place over and set up for Lane or whoever else was coming in. Francois Tita has also worked out there a lot. And, you know, we'd always be like crossing flight paths and talking on the phone.
So just to back up for 1 second, you came into this as a musician, engineer, producer?
Engineer. Yeah.
Before you met John, or you just, when you met him, you started?
I started out assisting at kind of one of the last commercial places in Minneapolis called Orphan Records. Like the old school intern, answer phones, clean toilets, wash floors. Okay, go sit in the studio for 2 hours.
Yeah.
Now go answer phones. And then the assistant's position opened up, and so I tried out for that. I think there was like 8 guys in the room, all fighting to wrap mic cables and like patch something. And Todd Fitzgerald from Winterland was actually my boss.
Oh,
back
wow.
then. So,
But did you know you wanted to do this?
I did know I wanted to do that, yeah. And I played in bands in high school. And by
so your
default,
background is as a player.
as a player, but then into engineering. My dad got me into it, setting up the PA for my bands in high school.
Right.
So that's how I started with my PV Black Widow speakers.
Nice. You still have them?
No, I sold them
I was
for a
hoping you'd tell
fortune.
me they were in your car. Dude, they're in my car. So good. So just go back a little bit. So then the parents ended up, do they control the studio now? Or is it, so the parents have the studio?
Yep. John's
wife-
parents own a land development company, and they wanted to kind of continue John's legacy. And they saw the estate battles kind of getting really dirty, and they just stepped in, and they had the means to do it, and they bought up everything from the estate and said, now you tell us what to do, Nick. Like, what do we
Great.
do with all this
Right.
stuff?
Oh, good for them.
And the guys at Vintage King actually helped out a lot.
They're-
Jeff
they're in-
Leibowitz
They're
and
in Minneapolis or they're in Detroit.
Detroit.
Yeah.
John's friends with Mike Nira from way back in the day, but I sent them a list of gear and they needed like a third party to appraise everything for the courts. And they immediately like flipped that around within days, which was huge, and just got everything settled. So there wasn't any more like so-and-so is going to walk off with this thing, or this thing's worth $5 and it's like worth $10,000.
Right.
And that's what John's parents were mostly worried about, is that all the people that could benefit from this estate were going to get ripped off. And they didn't want any money. They didn't need the money, but they wanted to make sure their grandkids and John's wife and like everyone's taken care of.
Right.
And so they stepped in and got it all appraised and took care of it. And like 80% of it was done then.
So they own the studio.
Yep.
The wife doesn't.
Nope.
Okay, great. And that's why the studio is still there.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, I explained to that lawyer at one point, I said to him on the phone, I said, it's a terrible business plan when you own a studio to not let people work there. I was like, this is really not this is how studios fail. You know what I mean? Like, if you want to go out of business, prevent me from coming up and recording for 3 weeks. Because if that happens all the time, you go out of business. And he didn't think that was funny at all. He was like, well, I don't know who you are and who do you think you're doing? And you're coming all the way over here from New Jersey. And, why you come here? I was like, dude, I have a website. Like, look at my website. I've been doing this for 35 years. Never incarcerated once.
Right.
You know what I mean?
At
Like,
least, well,
once.
yes, okay. Just keeping you honest, John.
That wasn't for robbery.
Right.
That was
You
for
had some funny
douchery.
emails.
What?
You had some funny emails.
Oh, right.
to the
Because I
lawyer.
was sharing them with you, right?
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
Just ripping him a new one.
What was his background as an engineer as well?
John was an engineer and a guitar player. Yeah. We all started out as kind of musicians, but got into the engineering side of things.
But before you started working for him, did you know him in Minneapolis or?
I knew of him.
Right.
And actually, when I was working at Orphan, that studio was kind of like mismanaged and not doing really well. And owners split up and started actually Winterland,
Right.
which was Echo Bay at the time. And then we kept going as Orphan. And I stayed on because they're like, well, now do you want to move up into the engineering spot? And worked there for another 2 years. And then eventually I was going to get laid off because they couldn't afford my salary, which I think was like $16,000 a year. Woo!
Yeah.
Like working 80 hours a week. Like, didn't care. It was like, this is awesome. Every day I'm working. And a friend that was on the Orphan record label knew John and was going to go record a bunch of stuff with him at his studio. And was like, come down. And he knew I was getting canned. And I was like, come down to see John. And after that, like, I think like that week, I just hung out there every day with him. And when they brought me in to like lay me off, I was like, cool. And they freaked out. They're like, what do you mean cool? They wanted me to come back and like work by the hour. And like, I think it was like $8 an hour or something like that. I'm like, no, I'm good. And they weren't happy at all.
So when you guys went to LA, there was a pretty happening studio scene there. What made you think you were going to bust in? And was there a calling card that brought you to LA?
Well, John had been going to LA a lot to find like work, and he knew like Nick Launay, who had come to Minneapolis. And I think a lot of it too is just classic Cooker fashion. Like, there's a huge amount of risk here, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Right.
And for whatever reason it works out, you take your lumps. And then
Did you think it was a risk? Or were you happy to go?
I didn't actually move to LA,
Ah.
but I like flew back and forth. And LA was like a residential studio as well, where we had a house. And so
was a
I would
house,
stay
right.
there for a while, months on end sometimes, and then fly back to Minneapolis.
Right. But also he used it for his own personal, right? I mean, it was like his project studio in a way at times.
Yep.
So I just think the whole deal was that, he wanted his own place.
Right.
I never got it.
Right.
Eventually, like,
Because he built them too well and
Yeah.
people wanted to come.
exactly.
Yeah.
And like Nick Launay was booked solid there for years. Like, it was like from one project to the
And
next.
he would primarily mix there, right? It was a mixing.
Yeah, and he mixed tons of stuff there. Yeahs, Arcade Fire.
Yeah.
Nick Cave did a record there.
Yep.
They mixed a record there.
Yeah, I know Nick from those Nick Cave records. Those records sound pretty amazing.
Yeah, Nick's awesome. And he lived up in the on the other side of the valley, and it was like a perfect situation for him. He didn't have to own a studio. It was kind of his own personal studio, and he could go there and knew everyone, and we all got along. And yeah, it was a really cool setup for a lot of different guys too. Like Francois Titaz worked there a lot.
Oh, what has he done?
He's done like that Gautier song.
Oh, cool.
And then a bunch of other stuff. He's from Australia. He just moved to LA. He does a lot of songwriting and other stuff like that. Francois is awesome.
Right.
Frank.
You call him Frank?
Frank, yeah.
Yes.
Are you a native of the Midwest?
Yes, northern Minnesota.
Wow.
An hour away from Canada, I grew up.
Like what?
Thief River Falls
Wow.
is the name of the town. 7,000 people.
Sounds like, when you say that, sounds like you have a speech impediment. Say that one more time.
Thief River Falls. My accent will come
Cold
out.
as shit, huh?
Cold as shit. Yeah. 30 below zero without a wind chill.
Wow.
80 below zero with a wind chill at times.
Jeez.
Wow.
And we jump on our snowmobiles and like go out anyway.
You got a good winter coat?
Oh yeah. Layers.
Layers.
Under Armour.
Yeah.
Ah.
Really?
Yeah.
Even back then, when as a kid?
Long johns.
Right.
Yeah. Like my dad would always say, like, I'm tired of being cold. I just wear the long johns all the time.
All the time.
And you put like bigger pants on in the winter.
Yeah.
And you're just always wearing them.
Well, what's summer like? It's got to be like.
It's beautiful.
So is it like warm though? Is it ever
Super
like
warm.
turn on the air conditioning in the summer?
Oh yeah. Like 100 degrees.
Wow.
And lakes and yeah.
Must be beautiful.
Minnesota's amazing.
Right.
I love having all four seasons.
Right.
It was nice going to LA and like getting away and like having this like 72 every day kind of thing,
Right.
but it gets kind of weird
Yeah.
for me.
I remember one of my early LA trips on Halloween. It was like 100 degrees. And I felt like that was just like my brain couldn't process that. You know what I mean? I'm used to Halloween trick-or-treating, walking around and just kind of having the coat on. You know what I mean? Like all the kids like bundled up but
Yeah, exactly.
in costumes. So yeah, I had the same thing. I always have that one day in LA of like, this is totally weird. And then the second day I'm there, I'm like, oh, this is cool.
Right.
You just get used to it.
Yeah, I had to wear my winter jacket trick-or-treating every year.
Yeah, I bet.
My mom would make me put it on under my costume. I was always like a fat something, like a fat pirate or...
Fat chef.
And all my friends like didn't have to do it.
Hey, so in both these studios, I would assume when you started there, you were on tape.
Yep.
You made the changeover at some point, or do you still do both?
Now I do, because we have such a big, well, first, yeah, we did start out on tape. At Orphan, we only had tape machines, MTR 90, and Sound Designer 2 to make CDs for people, which was
Nice.
awesome. Let's burn them at 2-speed from a DAT.
Right.
And then we bought a Pro Tools rig because everyone else in town had one.
Sound tools.
Yeah.
Is that what it was
888s.
back
The
then?
first one. Yeah.
Yeah. And Waves was in Sound Tools too. We would master records in Sound Tools. It's crazy.
Did you
thinking
keep
about it
your
now.
tape machines?
We kept the CD Underbelly tape machines. And then, so Orphan eventually got a Pro Tools rig. And then John, when I moved there, he had this awesome like HD rig, the fanciest, like, I think there were, what are they called? The old Avid converters, the 192s.
192.
Yeah. And I was like, wow, this is a great rig.
Those
and
are old?
fiber channel drives.
We
I know.
Whatever.
vintage digital.
It is. But we always were on tape and then dumping it in.
Right.
And then when we moved to LA, no one really wanted to use the tape machine anymore. They put like Wobble-matic, it still says it on the 827 on it, and they would like roll it across the driveway. And I'm like, oh, you guys. No.
Why would they do that?
They just were like, oh, what a stupid thing. It's taking up room. So when we bought all the gear from LA and moved it, I had Eddie Chiletti
Yeah.
restore the tape machine. And so now, because we have such a big console that API discrete, I have everything, and it's kind of the old way of doing things. Everything on the left side is microphones, and that's going to tape. The headphones are all being kind of played out to people on the microphones, and then everything on the right side is coming back from Pro Tools. And so
And
it's
is that
always
a jukebox with the dice faders on the right side? Yeah.
yeah, and it's a perfect smiley face.
Right.
But everything is always in repro, so I never have to dump in tape. It's always tracking in, and everything's always on tape, and you don't have to wait for it.
And do you clients request that, or do you recommend that?
I do that, and clients request it sometimes. And if people are like, no, we don't really want that,
Right.
like then we'll just go digital.
Right.
But
When you go digital, you just go to input on the multi-track and
Yeah.
you go through, right?
yeah, or we just unpatch the tape machine. But a lot of times people are like, wait, we're using tape? I'm like, yeah, 15 IPs.
That's great.
Yeah.
And how much of a life of one reel of tape do you get?
Well, it depends on the project. Like sometimes people will bring in the new ATR tape, which
Oh, they
is
will.
nice.
So guys will buy their own tape.
I have a stockpile of GP9, like brand new GP9, which is nice. But I would say, I don't know, like a record, maybe 2, and then I'll send them to Eddie and he bakes them for me.
Oh, great. And then you reuse them.
And we reuse them.
Oh, that's genius.
Wow.
I still like, I don't know. I think that's all voodoo.
What's that?
It freaks me out, like
That-
baking tapes and the old stuff. And I don't know. It works great, but it's, that like wizard stuff that you don't understand and why does it work?
Why
and
does it come back
is
smelling like a donut?
Yeah.
Everything smells like peaches. By the way, Eddie Saletti is an old record plant alumni. So
I remember when he first moved out, because he's out there.
Yeah.
I used to send them DAT machines.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he came to visit in Winterland a couple of times.
Yeah, he's a great resource.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a good dude.
Yeah.
He's like a lifetimer. He was very young at the record plant when I was there.
Was he in the shop?
Yeah, he was in the shop. He was super young. He was kind of like my age-ish, maybe younger. I never sent him any stuff to fix.
He can fix anything.
Yeah, yeah.
And he got really, I think when digital stuff happening, he learned how to fix like ADATs and DA88s and all the shit that was breaking.
Yeah, he's a
DAT
smart guy.
machines.
Right. Brand new things.
Brand new things that were breaking.
Yeah.
Now vintage. The vintage DAT machines.
Vintage digital.
16-bit.
So what you been working on lately? What's going on at Pachyderm now?
A lot of really cool kind of Americana folk records have been done lately. It's kind of become a spot for people to come and do that. We have like a trout stream. People love fly fishing. Like
Bring
guys
back the hippies, man.
Oh, it's hilarious. Like punk rock Nick is just shaking his head at me right now. But like we're making these beautiful records.
Yeah.
And they all live the life. Like I used to kind of like look at that stuff like, oh, you're just doing that or saying you do that. But no, you're out there every morning chopping wood.
Right.
Because that's your exercise.
Wow.
And you're walking around the woods fly fishing like,
And like literally nobody's taking showers or anything, right? It's like so.
Well, that's the cool thing. They all take showers too.
Wow. Posers.
They are posers because they shower.
Yeah. But can name artists? Are they like inspired like by like Trampled by Turtles or Sunvolt or shit like that?
Their Trampled by Turtles last record I just did out there.
Right.
That just came out. That was awesome. They were there for like a month. And Jeffrey Folkalt's another artist. That Trample record is actually a perfect example of Pachyderm though. Like you come there and you set aside all this time or lately anyway, you get done sooner than you think. Like we finished 2 weeks early on the Trample by
That's
Turtle
pretty
record.
great.
And Dave, who I work with a lot, he produces a lot of bands. I engineer for him.
Dave what?
Simonet.
Okay.
He's amazing. Great producer too. Like super cool guy. But he looked at me and he's like, let's start mixing, right? And we didn't even take a day off. Everyone like flew back home and Dave and I just camped out at the studio and mixed the record for like, I think the next like week or so.
Wow.
That console's amazing. It's so clean and so quiet, so much headroom. I just the other day showed someone like all the faders up, all the stereo buses up, turn the volume up all the way on the big speakers, and there's like no hiss, there's no noise, there's no nothing.
Amazing.
Do you have well, you said Eddie, but do you do the maintenance, the general? Right.
And then anything I can't do, I like make a giant list and have Eddie come in for a day and knock it out.
Right.
But I've learned a lot from Eddie and another guy in LA who is our tech out there, John Molino, just kind of watching them. I always say I'm kind of like a field medic.
Right.
I'm not a surgeon or a brain surgeon like you guys.
You're an EMT.
Yeah, I can get in there and I can like fix the 2510 and pop it back in the console and the session doesn't stop. It's like maybe 20 minutes to do that.
Good.
And I do it
quality
faster
to
than
have.
them.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not like, I don't really know all the things, and they're always trying to trace things down. Eddie's always giving me shit because I'm like, come on, dude, hurry up. Like, it's that thing. Well, we got to make sure. And I'm like, no, you don't.
Just fix.
That's the difference. You don't get paid by the hour.
Right.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, no, I live in Minneapolis. So it's like a 40-minute commute.
And if you work late, do you stay there?
All the time.
Right.
Yeah. Anything after midnight.
Right.
It's not worth it.
Yeah.
I mean, your brain's dead after like 12 hours driving home. It's just dangerous.
And the house is big enough, even if a band is staying there, you could always find a room. Mm-hmm. Right.
Or I have a little loft.
I forgot about the loft above the studio. That's right.
Yeah, my little nook.
Yeah.
Nick's nook. I got to change that mattress out.
So, too much information.
Yeah.
So, having never worked there, how big are the rooms? Is there isolation?
The record room?
Yeah. The bedrooms.
The main room.
So what's the dimension of the main room?
The whole studio, I think, is 3,500 square feet. Technically, there's 5 isolation rooms. There's one big one with a sliding glass door. I usually throw a singer in there. I think that's where Justin was. Mm-hmm. And then there's a smaller one that's super isolated. So the SVT or Marshalls, things like that live in there. And then like sound locks, and every room is wired for sound.
Right. But the main
room, I'm trying to think of dimensions. It's big.
It's really big.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know, like 30 by 20, I want to say.
And the height?
And the height is maybe like 20-foot ceilings.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah.
No, we got a really great live kit sound. I remember that. I remember bringing up the room mics and being like, this sounds really great.
And that's the last Westlake room ever.
No kidding.
Yeah. I can't remember his name. It's Westlake 14. He designed Prince's studio.
And what was the structure before it was built into a studio? Was it like a barn or?
It was a limestone cliff. It was nothing. They just started digging into the cliff until they hit limestone, and then they stopped and then built the studio out from there.
Wow. So the foundation is rock.
Yep. And then they poured cement over that, but there's no basement or anything like that, but it's built into the hill. So the studio kind of like, if you go up into the back of the studio, you can just walk out onto the roof.
Yeah, it's pretty beautiful.
Yeah.
Oh, so when John bought it, he just had the image of where the studio would be, and I see.
No,
he
the
didn't
studio
buy
was
it.
there.
Yeah.
When John bought it, it had been running since like the 90s.
Yeah. 87, 88 is when they started the studio.
Oh.
Do we know who the original owners are? Do you have a name? Who are they?
Jim Nickel and Eric Anderson. There's a third guy, and they kind of split the partnership up, and Jim Nickel had it for a while, like during the Nirvana days and all that. And then he sold it to Matt Mueller, who, it was kind of a hippie commune back then. They were like throwing parties and going crazy. They didn't really do much music there. I think Andrew Bird and some other people recorded there, but not a lot of stuff.
Right.
And then they foreclosed on them and kicked them all out. And even during that time, there was
so when he got it was in foreclosure.
when John got it, yeah.
So the original guys, were they all in the music business, or were they music enthusiasts, or were they engineer producers? Or
They were like engineers and music enthusiasts. So, and they were in like Madison, Wisconsin, and basically put a pin at MSP and drew a 100-mile circle around it. And were looking they knew that they wanted to build a residential place in the Midwest. It's pretty cool. Like Nirvana, and there's a couple other records, like you can hear that room.
Right.
Like it's got a sound to it for sure. I mean, Albini's got a lot to do with that, obviously, but like there's definitely like a sound to that room.
So he did the PJ Harvey record there too, right? Yeah.
So the first time this John came to the studio, did he terrify you?
A little bit.
He did, right?
Yeah.
No. That's a
true.
common. Turns out he's okay, but he's scary as shit.
It's good.
But seriously, when he first came out, were you assisting for him, or you did it together, or?
Yeah, we did it together.
Yeah, and like started out like kind of, I mean, honestly, like I had listened to a lot of records that John had done, and like growing up, like loved Dinosaur Jr. and Sunvolt. and all of that stuff. And so I was like really excited to have him out and like nervous. And like, I think I was pretty quiet for like the first like 3 or 4 days. And I remember the day you're like, oh, Nick came out of his shell. Because I was like, oh shit.
Yeah. No, but I roll
Don't
in.
fuck up.
But it's you, I'm sure you do the same thing. You do the same thing. You roll into somebody else's studio, and instead of pretending you know everything about the studio, I say to Nick, I lean on Nick and say, where should we put the drums? What kind of mics? Where do you put the room? What do you want? And he's doing all the setup.
Right.
So ultimately, we did track it together. But also it freed me up to just have fun with it. Remember the time I ran across the room and tackled the guitar player, Joshua, during the playback? Like out of the blue, just ran like
That's
so
what I mean
happy.
about scaring people.
No, we cut a really great track of a song and I was super excited, right? And I just ran across the room and grabbed the guy and we just landed on the floor. And this was not like drinking or anything. It was just in midday. And he was like...
And we were dancing with our shirts off in front of their GoPros because they were just obsessed. They didn't want. They were like, "We're making a record."
He had his shirt off.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
You couldn't tell.
Me
It was all
too.
there.
And we didn't tell them. We just like sat down and like, and later they're editing the footage. It's John running around naked.
He's got a lot of those stories, by the way.
I sure do.
I've heard a few.
We did have a great time though.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, and that's why I was so excited about coming back for Night Moves. And that was such a crazy time because I remember mixing at Fluxivity and literally having to call this lawyer all the time and just have to deal with it. And I think my manager, even Debbie, tried to call a bunch and they wouldn't even talk to her. I had to talk to me. But yeah, I missed you at that point because I mean, I was looking back to coming back and spending another 3 weeks tracking with those guys. That would have been fun.
Yeah, and I really enjoy having outside people come into the studio because whether I'm just like Pro Tools engineering or even assisting, like John and I would always assist for people, and they're like, "Oh, aren't you bored?" It's like, no,
You're learning.
we're learning and helping you. We're like the studio concierge, you know.
Right.
I love doing that.
That's
stuff.
great.
And also, it's always fun to see how different people do different things. I mean,
But that's kind of a noble way to approach it. It's all part of one process, and whether you're calling the shots or hitting the faders or creating a vibe, it's all part of making.
Yeah, exactly. No, and that's probably the biggest thing I ever learned from John was how to create the vibe and like build a place or make an environment for people to be creative in and, not get in their way. We joke around and stuff. And then at times it was like, hold on.
Yeah.
Something's happening here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good. It's definitely, I know those guys, once again, we talked about it, but those guys had never cut a record live before, even though they'd made 5 records. Mm-hmm. And it was a little bit of a shock to their system, but me and Nick together worked with them and we got them through it. And they actually cut great tracks. I thought the tracking was fantastic. And then we got some really vibey tracks, which was their kind of mission statement in the beginning anyway. They wanted a live record. They wanted a band record, not like a process, okay, now bass, now guitar. But I think at the end of the day, when it was presented to them and they realized that there was a balance that they had to play together, you know what I mean? It was not as easy as just standing in front of the speakers playing bass.
That's why they were
a little like, what? But we got them through it. And the room was great because they all were in the room together. So it was really a vibey experience.
And 90% of the records that are done there are done live.
Right.
It's like the best place I've ever worked at to
great.
track live records.
That's great.
You can look out the window and see, like people joke like eagles flying by. There's this like an animatronic eagle flying around, but it's like a real eagle.
Right.
And like a deer like just out inside the window or, the environment from the outside is kind of inspiring everything on the inside.
Yeah.
Right.
And then we have the facility and the headphones and all the technical things to like pull it off too.
Fabulous.
Tell us some of you clearly know old Pachyderm lore.
Well, I know old lore, but I think I was like 13 years old. So it's
I know, but you heard word of mouth, right?
Yeah, well, it's really cool. One of the old engineers who grew up across the street lives now down the street. He's our neighbor.
In Cannon Falls.
In Cannon Falls. His first gig was picking up Nirvana at the airport as an intern. Wow. And so he was there during a lot of that stuff. But yeah, there's all kinds of weird stories. Like everyone thinks the studio is haunted.
Right.
But it's not.
Oh shit, I'm glad this is great. All right.
This is where
Another haunting story.
it's hilarious.
Yeah.
Like Brent Sigmuth, great engineer, worked there forever. There's a band called Hum.
Yeah.
They recorded there. And the producer had a sampler hooked up to a speaker in the woods. And so every time the band would walk to the house, he would like play like leaves rustling or like even like that. And we've done this since, like put Bluetooth speakers in suspended ceilings.
Woo!
Yeah.
Theremin.
We Googled generic ghost sound. And that's what, woo! Or like a man being disemboweled on the sampler, you know, and then like, so this is happening like all week long for Hum. And the last day, the guy runs in and he's like, oh my God, you guys, I just heard a baby crying in the woods. Like something's going on out there. You know, they never told him. And I guess later on he found out and was just pissed. So all these like pranks basically are people
Created the legacy.
created this like haunting. Like people get so scared of the house. And I'm like, you read this on the internet. It's not true. Like I
Right.
know the backstory. There's no like dead baby in the woods.
Yeah.
It's a sampler and with a speaker attached to it.
Yeah, Dreamland in Woodstock has the priest.
Oh yeah,
You know what I mean? Like
think
that's
I've
supposed to
seen
be
that
haunted.
guy.
You have not.
Of course I have. The thing flying across the room. You remember that one?
No.
Okay.
No. No,
How
but
about an artist we work with up there who drove up and saw women hanging from the trees?
that didn't happen.
It sure did. Well, she said it did.
Who?
I'll go to your discography and tell you.
There's this place in Dreamland, right? We first started working there together like a long time ago. We did, I engineered some stuff with him or for him or whatever.
They have the same console as us.
Yes.
The
right.
legacy.
And it was like the same thing, right? It was the old Messina console.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That Dreamland book.
Not the original.
No, but the API.
Yeah, right.
So that place has been haunted forever. And I mean, I make a project up there every year, and I'm there for a month, and it's not haunted.
But I heard
right?
it was a good haunting.
It's not a good haunting it's not
The
a
guy-
haunting. It's
no,
not
the-
haunted. Dude, I have my doors open all the time. I don't hear anything.
It's a
I stay at
200-year-old church.
I know.
Ask Joel. See
no,
what he
it
says.
doesn't matter. It's all hype, and studios are haunted are like the new kind of
Exactly. That was my point exactly. But I did one night in Bearsville, which was legendary. And we should ask Clearmountain that because he used to
Oh,
work
okay.
up there a lot. I was so fucking convinced for no reason other than hearing every schmuck in
Yeah.
the world tell me that I sat in a chair all night.
No, you're self-haunting. It's like,
Yeah. No, that's what happens. This self-haunting.
you're self-haunting. It's really ridiculous. Because,
It's all
like I
bullshit.
said, I have spent so much time in Dreamland, and I also, when I stay at Dreamland, I don't stay in the band house. I've just let them stay there. I stay in the studio upstairs. In the rectory, whatever, not the rectory, whatever, the residence is in the studio building. So
It didn't used to be.
I'm going to be haunted, I'm there, ready for the haunting. And I have my doors open. I wake up in the morning. I take it. There's nothing. I've never had an incident, and I feel like it's just that thing where it's cool to say your studio's haunted.
What I've had happen at that place, and it's not a haunting, just magical moments.
like me running into your bedroom naked.
That wasn't there, but that was somewhere else. But it's an old church and it's beautiful. And if you're there like in the summer, the doors are open. If you leave the doors open,
Right.
the light comes in and it's kind of bizarre. And if you got a little going,
Yeah. But also, like with the church thing, it's like it's 4:30 and the sun is shining through the stained glass, and you're looking out
Yeah.
the window, and the guy's singing, and you can see like the different
That's
color
right.
rays of sun, and that's like beautiful. That's not haunting, but anyway. So yeah, I don't know
Magic
about
moments.
Yeah,
self-haunting.
exactly.
That should be the name of this.
Oh, no.
All right,
We got to find a name for this.
self-haunting. Well, good. All right, right.
Really great to have
Yeah,
you, Nick.
thank you, Nick.
And it sounds like an amazing thing you've done and quite a journey
Yeah.
Yeah.
with all these studios in different places, conflicts,
Conflict resolution.
conflict resolution, people passing away,
Yeah.
studios living on. Good job keeping it going, man.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huge fan.
Oh,
Awesome.
Here you go. Thank you so
Nick,
much.
thank you,
Yeah.
man.
Thank you guys.
All right. Good work.
Super.
Woo. Me and Stewie want to thank all you gear clubbers for listening to this crazy podcast we do. If you can, leave a review on iTunes. It really makes a difference. And don't be shy. We love hearing from you guys on the social media at Gear Club Podcast. Don't forget to go to gearclubpodcast.com for Spotify playlists, links and photos for the episodes, and my favorite hot sauce of the month.